we're trying to make this series more accessible. So I wanted to ask if you have any hot takes on Book 6 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics.
I think that Aristotle doesn't have as extreme a view as is usually attributed to him by commentators about the unity of the virtues. I think he thinks that
Hello and welcome to the Happiness Project. My name is Bjorn Rich. We're here in New Haven, the Athens of South Central Connecticut. Today I'm sitting down with Agnes Callard, a philosopher king. Is that gender neutral?
I think queen would be the more gender appropriate term.
I was wondering if it was like an actor-actress situation where it's actually offensive sometimes to call someone an actress.
It makes sense, but I think that hasn't yet happened to the word king.
Now more than ever, we need to maybe change that. All right, well, Agnes is a professor, but also a prolific writer. Your writing has been featured in the New York Times, the Atlantic, and the New Yorker. Unfortunately, I had already read my 5 articles for the month, so there was a paywall.
Maybe next month.
Maybe next month. So I wanted to start by asking about how you view your role as a public intellectual.
I think of it as asking philosophical questions in the presence of people who haven't yet bought into the philosophy project. So you have to sell what you're doing at the same time as you do it. I think you can mean 2 different things by selling an idea. I think that what I mean is sort of selling a question.
And how do you do that?
I think...
Sorry, that was me just selling a question.
Good job. That's kind of it. I mean, that is how you do it, right? So something I found in my early years of teaching is you cannot fake interest in a question. That is, it's really hard to get the students to answer a question if all you're doing is pulling answers out of them. So I think that is the key to selling a question, is actually wanting to know the answer yourself.
I feel that so much. I have friends where I have lunch with them, and I'm just like, how's your boyfriend? But I don't care.
They can probably tell.
Yeah. Well, they should have more interesting boyfriends.
Or you could ask them more interesting questions.
Or they could break up with their boring boyfriends. The ancient philosophers weren't just old white guys. They were old white guys in Greece. I wanted to ask if you think Plato was the Socrates of his time.
No.
Then would you give him another analog, perhaps like the Judith Butler of his time, or I don't know, the Kelly Clarkson of his time?
Plato, okay, the way I think of Plato, and this is not the way most people think of Plato, is the guy who brought us Socrates. Because Socrates didn't write anything down.
Lazy.
He was against writing, so he put himself in the hands of the future to be remembered however they saw fit. And the way Plato saw fit was by memorializing Socrates. It's more like Boswell's Life of Johnson.
It also sounds like he's a little bit like Julia Fox, who in her career has sought to represent herself in a way that sometimes involves other people sort of overcoming their own biases in the process of representing her.
I'm sorry, I don't know who that is, Julia Fox.
Oh, she dated Kanye for a month, but she's way more than that.
Okay.
She released a book in November. Actually, I think you would really like it.
Is it about philosophy?
It's about her personal philosophy. She was in Uncut Gems, if you've seen.
I haven't. My husband said that it would be too stressful for me. Do you think it would? Uncut Gems.
Which has... this is a recent one.
I only have one husband at the moment.
Okay.
Only one at a time is allowed.
Okay.
Most of the United States.
Okay.
So yeah, he said that it would be. He said it was very tense and that it would stress me out.
Aristotle said, "Happiness depends upon ourselves." Do you think this is something he picked up in therapy, or was it more of an aha moment?
Therapy didn't exist. Eudaimonism says that happiness has to somehow come home to the person whose happiness it is. Mm-hmm. So say I'm happy. Someone might be tempted to say, Agnes, you're happy because you're famous, right? But my fame isn't mine. It's a representation of me in the minds of other people. So that can't be happiness, according to Aristotle, because it doesn't come home to me.
So you don't think fame makes you happy?
Correct. I think if anything, it makes you unhappy, yes.
Betty, write that down, because I need to do a lot of thinking. Okay.
The end of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is often viewed as a very hardcore version of the unity of the virtues thesis, which says that if you have one of the virtues, you've got to have all of them. You can't be wise, good at making decisions, unless you're also temperate about your desires. So like if you just want to overeat on cookies or whatever, then that means you can't be wise. But I think that Aristotle thinks that even somebody who is weak-willed, who overeats cookies, can still be wise in terms of their practical decision making.
If only they had Ozempic.
Well, what Ozempic would do would mask the absence of moderation. It wouldn't replace the moderation.
Tell that to Oprah. You wrote an article canceling Aristotle. Again, this was behind a paywall. So what did he do? Did he like say a slur?
Aristotle thought that slavery was not only permissible, but actually a good thing.
Jesus. Okay.
He also thought that women were constitutionally incapable of having a certain kind of deliberative role of like being in charge.
I'm sorry, I don't want to, like, that's messed up.
For all Aristotle's flaws, there's something in his ethics that is powerfully interesting. The idea that there's an ethical injunction to be awesome or amazing. In a lot of ethical thought, you're just supposed to behave yourself. But there isn't something like be excellent, be shining forth, be
slay.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that because I really don't think people are valuable unless they are successful. And people look at me like I'm crazy when I say that. But I'm like, if you don't have a IPO by the time you're 25.
So Aristotle holds a view that's similar to that, except instead of success, he would put virtue. But you think, well, that IPO thing, I actually don't know what that is, but it's some form of financial success, I take it. Okay. You think that that's a marker that the person has something inside themselves, right? Because of course there could be somebody who achieves that totally by accident.
I think if you're a good person, you succeed, and if you're a loser, you fail.
And so Aristotle would say, what you're tracking is something that may or may not be a reliable correlate of virtue.
It just sounds like someone who hasn't IPO'd.
That's very true about Aristotle.
Your New Yorker profile says you will agree to a podcast with essentially anyone who asks, regardless of that person's politics or credentials. How do you vet who you're talking to so you don't end up somewhere stupid?
Did I really say that? I don't think that's true.
You've emphasized the importance of dialogue and disagreement. Is that true?
Have I emphasized it? I think I have,
no,
yes.
It's not. Sorry. I wanted to ask your philosophical opinion, because you like sometimes to dive into hypotheticals.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I have a friend named Josh, or for example, or not Josh. It could Ben. Let's say I have a friend named Ben, and we're friends, but we're like not really just friends.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I don't want to ruin the friendship, but it's like we're not just friends. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm just like, what are we doing, Josh? Ben, what are we doing? Like, what are we? What are we? What are we?
I think Josh Ben is probably the person who has to answer that question, but I will tell you that a surprising number of people ask me for relationship advice, and I'm really honored by it, by the thought that I would have wisdom there. I think in general, it's very, very hard to know what someone should do with their life, even if they're very close to you, let alone if you know only a few facts about them.
Totally. Would it help if I told you he does lacrosse?
Not very much.
He's from Greenwich, Connecticut, and he's 5'11". He says he's 6 foot, but he's not. And yeah, he has really beautiful eyes. So does that.
That's just a few more facts.
Ethical polyamory, ethical non-monogamy. If it's so ethical, why do they always have to say it? Because if I was like, I'm gonna go ethically show that woman the value of property, you'd be like, you're gonna steal her purse.
I think ethical there is just a substitute for consensual. Presumably with respect to any relationship or any marriage, monogamous or not, many of them are unethical.
Totally. We actually interviewed Steven Pinker. He called your thinking shallow, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to clap back.
I agree with him in a certain way. So I wrote something for The Atlantic saying that I think he's really picking up on something true. One of the things that I think philosophers aim for, maybe not so much in all of our writing, but something we aim for in conversation is a certain kind of directness, clarity, immediacy. We try not to be mysterious, and so there's a way in which that's true, and I guess I just don't take it as an insult.
Totally. Clapped back. What would Plato say about Tinder?
I'll be more comfortable answering what Socrates would say.
Or Socrates.
Yeah, I think Socrates would say there's really only one question with respect to another human being that you ever need to have about them, which is what can you learn from them?
What can I learn from you?
Well, that's for you to answer, right? That's what you've been doing this whole time, trying to learn from me. So I can't be the judge of that. You have to be.
All right. Well, thank you. This has been the Happiness Project. Thank you so much, Agnes.
Sure.
Professor Callard, Philosopher Queen.